Hello, movie fans. Welcome to another episode of Logan's Movie Reviews. And today we are talking about The Dead Zone, the TV show starring Anthony Michael Hall. And we are looking specifically at the final show of season 3 and the first show of season 4, the dual set being called Tipping Point, parts 1 and 2. And I'm joined once again by One Silva. How you doing, man?
Hey, good afternoon, Logan. Good afternoon, TV and movie fans. As we talk about what was a great adaptation of both the Stephen King novel and movie starring Christopher Walken, The Dead Zone, starring Anthony Michael Hall, and you couldn't find a better actor to play that role that Christopher Walken, lionized in the 1983 movie.
Yeah, and I think, you couldn't have picked a better guy, and I think he really grew into the role because he had to do, a lot more when it came down to it than Christopher Walken. After, how many seasons did this show go?
So, you're right. 80 episodes, 5 seasons compared to a 2-hour movie. You're right.
Yeah. They did a great job of expanding, this single concept into like a huge series and incorporating all the elements from the movie in a way that kept it suspenseful. Even though you watched the movie.
The movie was a perfect segue into a series. Because here's this guy with this psychic ability, and he's able to use that psychic ability to solve crimes with what at first was his nemesis, the husband to his former fiance, who fell in love with the sheriff while he was in a coma. Then they team up and they become a crime fighting duo, and they solve a lot of crime, and they prevent crime from happening, which, as you saw Christopher Walken's Johnny Smith do in the movie The Dead Zone, when he told that little boy don't go play hockey, and he stays home, but the rest of the team goes and dies.
Right. So it's set up perfectly for a series. And so they did it. It took them a while.
This series ended without that apocalypse or without Johnny Smith bringing down Greg Stilson. And by the way, speaking of perfect casting, not only is Anthony Michael Hall the perfect guy to play the Christopher Walken role, Sean Patrick Flannery was the perfect guy to play the Martin Sheen role. Great casting whatsoever. Great casting.
And then also even the girl who plays Sarah.
She's perfect. She reminds me of the actress Brooke Adams. She reminds me of Brooke Adams, especially with the haircut.
Yeah, exactly the same haircut. And then they had now, was there a reverend in the original movie?
No, I'm not sure if there was a reverend in the book, but this was a great role played by the always great David Ogden Stiers of MASH fame.
Yeah, what a great actor he is. And then you also have the role of Bruce, which is not in the original movie, right?
He's the John L. Adams, who never acted again after this. This was his last acting role, which is sad because he was the conscience of this program. He kept Johnny in line. Johnny could have gone dark many times throughout the series, but it was Bruce who was his physiotherapist, who would calm him down, would be his voice of reasoning, would be like, "Nah, we can't do this."
He was committed to John, though, man. Like he was doing a lot of unpaid hours with this dude.
Oh no, because they became best friends. That's why. That was his best friend on the show, and without the character of Bruce, he killed Stilson when he first finds out the damn that he's going to destroy the world.
But what's interesting is what we see in this set of episodes is Bruce is basically coming around to the idea that Stilson needs to be shot. It's better that Rebecca does it and not him. It's like let her do it, let her get killed, let her take one for the team and end this.
Yeah, but Johnny's not going to allow that because he loves her. Right. This is his first real relationship since Sarah broke his heart.
Yeah. So there's a great little paradoxes in here, especially with when we get but we'll talk about it when we go through the episode. But
we forgot that the guy that plays the demonic version of Johnny Smith that he sees in his visions is the great Frank Whaley from Pulp Fiction.
Right. No, and then there's the that's a great role too, and it's a great way to introduce another angle of the story from a guy who actually lived through the apocalypse and is looking at the other side, trying to figure out how it happened. So because you don't really get the information in the movie, you just figure this guy's nuts. He starts a nuclear war and gets everybody blown up.
Oh, because they wrap it up in 2 hours. You got 2 hours to do this. While the series, you could see, you also give Greg Stilson a backstory. When you see the movie, Martin Sheen plays this evil motherfucker, he's evil Greg Stilson, who's morally corrupt. But the series gives you a chance to explore how he got to that point, and these 2 episodes show you how he gets to the point of where he's morally corrupt.
We should just set up the show here. Is that
go ahead? Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
So essentially, this guy gets in an accident and he's in a coma for 6 years, and they always think he's never going to wake up. His wife, he was engaged to be married. That woman goes on to marry the sheriff, who named Walt Bannerman, and she becomes she becomes his kind of friend who. I think they end up having sex though at one of the episodes anyway, behind Bannerman.
In the movie they have sex, and if I'm not mistaken, in the pilot episode of this series they have sex. This is like her goodbye sex.
In the movie, he never even has sex with her. I think he goes on a few dates.
The baby she has in the movies with her husband. Now they combined 2 names, 2 characters. In the movie. You had Walt Hazlitt was her husband, and Greg Bannerman was a detective played by Tom Skerritt. In the series, they combined the names, and Walt Bannerman, to make just one character, he's her husband. And you're right, I think in the movie they were engaged, but they were saving each other for marriage. When he wakes up, he sees that she's married with a son. Son's not his. Chris Bruno, who plays Walt Bannerman, tremendous, and got to give the actor credit. His facial expressions are great throughout this series. And, while there is some jealousy there, he grows to respect and love Johnny as like a brother.
He's constantly vouching for him in this show. So he's a force of good in this, even though his wife is basically on the verge of cheating on him in almost every episode. But
almost every episode, because that's her first love. He broke her virginity, and anybody who knows anything, a woman, no matter how much a man shits on that woman's always going to have a place in her heart for the man that ended her virginity.
Yeah, I guess you're right about
and
that.
Johnny's never shitted on her. He was in a coma. And when he came out, she had fallen in love and married somebody else. So there's also guilt behind that love, too. You can understand where she's coming from. She's in love with 2 men. Well, and she's lucky. They're 2 good men.
What was great about Johnny is that he's he meets any girl he meets, he shakes her hand, and he knows he's going to fuck her because he sees it. So it's just imagine if you had that power. You're just I'm
you
had
that power. You save a lot of money.
It's not like he touches everybody he touches. He has a vision of. Otherwise, he'd be going completely insane.
I think if something bad's going to happen to them.
Right.
Remember after he gets shot by the police or by the federal agents or whatever in the movie, he grabs Stilson, Martin Sheen's hand, and the vision is gone. And he's like, "Oh, don't worry, everything will be all right."
But also he has this power, which I don't think he had in the movie, where he can go back and look at your past, too. Say somebody, I remember in one of the episodes, because I watched a couple leading up to this, was that they were trying to find their mother that they left behind in Vietnam. And so he is able to go back into their time when they were separated during the war and figure out that she was still alive, and so that they could find her. So he's there's a lot of episodes where he's giving off his services to solve individual crimes as they keep this storyline that we're talking about going. Mm-hmm. So the storyline that's basically the storyline of the movie, they are managed to spread that storyline across the entire series while he has different adventures using his power.
They did it so well that they didn't even get a chance to come to the conclusion before the show was canceled.
That's too bad, man. They should have given him at least. They're like, all right, we'll give you one more season to wrap this shit up. But I guess, that's the way it goes with TV. But I'm surprised they don't get Netflix to finish this show because there would be a demand for it.
Without a doubt.
So when we have this guy, he's like, having these powers. There's always that sexual tension with his, former fiance, but he's backed up and he's got a friend, basically a best friend in both Bruce and Walt. But meanwhile, he has like this Reverend Purdy, was good friends with his mom, and there was some money there that he was managing, or she was investing in some funds that were managed by the church, and it looks like he was embezzling that money, and he wasn't exactly the most trustworthy of preachers. He was a little bit of a shady guy.
He loved Johnny as a son. Why? Because he was in love with Johnny's mother, and Johnny's mother killed herself while Johnny was in a coma. And the Reverend Purdy, played by the great David Ogden Stiers, covered it up and made it look like she died of a heart attack.
Yeah. So there's a question in one of the episodes whether he murdered her for the money, and he didn't.
No, he would never have done that. Yes, he embezzled the money and he put it into financial schemes that failed. That no question. But he would have never done anything to her. That was the love of his life, and he loved Johnny as his own son. And as you see in this episode, he committed a crime of perjury because he was trying to defend Johnny out of love for Johnny.
That's right. So that's the thing about him. He's not entirely a good force, but he definitely has a soft spot for Johnny, and he'll do the right thing now and then. But at first, he's backing Stilson. He's very involved in promoting him. I think he suspects that Stilson is shady too, but Stilson has certain information about his embezzlement that he can hold over Purdy's head, so he's keeping him in line that way. And so when this one photographer who's working with the campaign of the politician,
she's making a documentary on Stilson's campaign run.
Right. She disappears and ends up dead. It becomes, and the last person to be seen with her is Johnny, who has experiencing, because of his visions, he's experiencing all these blackouts. So there's this crucial blackout that occurs between the time that he meets with her and the time that she disappears that makes it look like that because he went back and tried to investigate the murder during the blackout, he's got his prints all over the murder scene, and he gets framed for the murder. He almost frames himself, really. I mean, it's pretty sad.
That's why Reverend Purdy lies, because he to save Johnny from going to prison. Also, I want to mention something. I love it when television shows what goes on in real life politics and real life chicanery. She's killed because she catches the Stilsons rigging polling machines right after what happened in the 2000 debacle that helped George Bush Jr. win the presidential election.
Because that was the scheme. When they had all these problems, they're like, "Oh, we got the solution. We're going to have electronic voting machines with no paper trail." There's some fishy shit still today going on with those machines.
And also, in the second part of the episode that we talk about, we meet a political backer, a very powerful man with an Illuminati ring that he's wearing.
Yeah. Right. No, he's a force that comes in and cleans up everybody's mess. So we have here, this setup here is that he becomes a celebrity because at first they all doubt him, and so he has a vision of this guy dying, and while he's playing, he's having a heart attack, and he has him pulled from the game. He's the coach actually of this team, and so he has the guy pulled to save his life, and they end up losing like the national championships or whatever.
Well,
and he's just
saves the boy's life, right? He saves the young man's life.
Afterward, the boy collapses like in the locker room, but because it wasn't like on the field with all this chaos, he's saved. And they realize that he does have this power. He becomes this celebrity and almost like a force, a political force unto himself, where everybody's like trying to like he gets solicited to be helpful in all these other cases, and but there's a lot of also people who don't trust him, who think he's a charlatan, who think that he's like a nut, and so he's got kind of like people are like 50-50 on this guy, and he has also this thing in for this politician who Stilson, who he shook his hand and he saw the destruction of DC by a nuclear bomb, and he's just like, somehow this dude is causing it. And so the whole thing is like, how do I prevent this? And he does. It's weird. It doesn't occur to him really at all that he has to just kill Stilson, which I would think you would come to you right away. But it seems like he doesn't want to. He kind of wants to figure it out before killing him, right?
Yes, I agree with you 100%. While it's different because when he meets Stilson in the series, he has things to live for. He has a relationship with his son. He's got a best friend at Bruce. Him and he's very close with Walt and his ex-fiance. He's got a great relationship with the Reverend. So while in the movie, his mother's gone, his fiance is gone, he's got no children. He's a much darker figure in the movie when he meets Stilson. Basically, he's got nothing to live, so he's going to kill this guy, right?
Right, but here it's like he sees this thing, and for him it's just like he just starts investigating Stilson. He starts becoming very interested in Stilson, and Stilson starts to notice him. And Stilson's a very deft politician and very well liked and very well connected. So they are constantly in this kind of play because he kind of knows that Johnny knows that he's shady because Johnny's a psychic and he can see basically a lot of things that other people can't see. So he's always wary of him, but he still treats him with kindness and kind of friendly, jousting here and there.
But also Stilson doesn't think that Johnny could see anything on him because Stilson, even though Stilson is corrupt, he doesn't get his hands dirty. He doesn't commit these crimes. The only crime that he's going to actually commit, is that nuclear war he sets off years later.
Yeah, when he becomes president.
That's it. So, but I don't even know if he's thinking, at that time he's not thinking that. At that time he's thinking, how do I become as powerful as I can be?
Right. So in one of the episodes, Johnny becomes, like the campaign manager for his opponent in the House race. And he advises him on ways in which he can beat back the attacks of him because he anticipates what's going to be, how he's going to be challenged in the debate and stuff like that. But then he starts to see that the other guy that he's advocating for has a darker secret, that he murdered all these people in Vietnam, all these innocent civilians. So he ends up resigning, and that actually helps Stilson get into the House. So it's just like everything he's doing here is like he's trying to derail Stilson, kind of helps him out, which is kind of sad. Like that's the whole kind of the whole thing of the show. It's just like he's constantly trying to derail him, and it's like Stilson always has Teflon and always manages to pull through somehow. Now Stilson has this dad who's very domineering, and that same father was in the movie, playing, like, trying to pull strings to help his son out. So he's doing a lot of dirty work even underneath the nose of Stilson that he doesn't even know about. So that's another factor in this whole thing. So let's just go. We'll start off in the episode of the last episode of season 3. We have Johnny in the hospital. They're saying we can cure you, and he's having more and more of these blackouts and seizures and stuff. And they're saying, listen, if we don't cure this thing that's going on in the dead zone of your mind, this psychic ability, it will kill you. So that's another stake that's added, is that if you don't allow yourself to stop getting these visions, you'll die. So he's always on the verge, and he keeps getting more and more blackouts, which open him up to charges of murder and things like that, and other, he's doing things while he's in a blackout. It's not like he's not doing anything. He's actually like doing stuff and investigating crimes during a blackout, so he has to go back and revisit those blackouts in a vision. I mean, it's like he's having had to have visions of himself because he's so like his mind starting to lose sense. So he doesn't want to give up the power though, because he's starting to uncover what he wants. He needs it to figure out what's going to cause the end of the world in a few years. So he, while his loved ones are telling him that he needs to like just get this thing taken care of so he can save himself, he's like thinking about saving the world. And I don't think he's told many people about this. I think he only told Bruce, and maybe he told Sarah, but no one else knows about the end of the world.
I don't think he told Sarah. I think he only told Bruce, and he eventually tells Rachel.
And I think he tells Walt too at some point. But anyway, so he's like he figures out though that he gets visited by this guy. Now there's this dude who ends up. How do we explain this guy that visits him? The guy from Pulp Fiction.
It's about Frank Whaley. He's a victim of the apocalypse, and somehow, some way, he gets into Johnny's head, and he's like trying to reason with Johnny to you gotta let things work itself out. You gotta let her sacrifice herself.
Oh wait, I figured.
Look what happened.
Okay, that's right. He had a piece of Johnny's cane, and somehow after the explosion, he himself got some of Johnny's ability, and when he touched Johnny's cane, he became connected up with him like psychically in some weird way. So they both have he has a piece of Johnny's cane from back then, from in the future, and Johnny has his cane, and when they both touch that cane, they become connected. So they start to see each other's vision. So he starts to see this dude's vision of like the post-apocalyptic future of the world, like everything's ruined and bombed out, but he's alive, and maybe who knows how many people, probably like 5 people are alive, but we know that this dude is, and he's all burnt in his face, and his whole thing was like he just wanted to he wanted to get in touch with Johnny to save his family from being murdered, right? Because his family gets murdered by that private detective who's reporting back to his wife and showing that he cheated, and that's the whole sub of one of the shows. So he eventually ends up rescuing that dude's family. But meanwhile, that alternate universe where the dude ends up, he still survives the apocalypse no matter what. His family gets killed or not. They all get killed in the apocalypse, So this dude's, every time Johnny grabs his cane, he gets a vision. If the other guy's holding on to that cane too, they connect up, and he gets a vision of that, and he gets more information about what's going on in the present where he's in. So he figures out from that dude that the Reverend Purdy lied about this suicide letter. There was this disgraced priest who, some videos turned up online of him doing some S&M shit, and so he resigns. But then he gets murdered just so they can pin on all this death of this girl who gets the camera girl. And who he was murdered by, it looks like it's Stilson, and it looks like also Stilson killed Rachel, the girl who's the camera woman. So, because he was having an affair with her, we find that out at least. But and we'll get to who actually killed her. But the whole thing is like Johnny's trying to prove with the help of her sister Rebecca that Stilson murdered this girl, and it's like, that's the best way to get him out of office too, and also, it solves both problems. If they can get him busted for the murder, then he won't become president, and the end of the world won't happen. But the thing is he's still getting these visions. Even though every time he comes into contact with Stilson and he shakes his hand, he sees the end of the world. So she starts to also realize that, he's going to get away with this shit. So she starts to get in her head that she has to kill him. So then we see him, he gets a vision from the bullet fragments of Ellman killing Kennedy. There's 2 guys that are kind of behind Stilson. It's his father and then Ellman. And Ellman is kind of like the dirty work. He plants bugs in people's houses. He murders people. And so we see him shooting this disgraced priest, making it look like a suicide by holding the gun. And he confronts Purdy, and he's like, "Why did you lie? Why did you lie and write that fake suicide note?" And he's like, "I did it to protect you because I didn't want you to go down for a murder I know you didn't commit." And so, and he's like, and he also is like, was this all? Kind of confronts him about the money, but he's like, "I really don't care about the money. Shit, I could just go to Vegas and make like $2 million right now if I want to. So it doesn't bother me about the money." I mean, it's almost like he could say that, right?
He go to a boxer's locker room and grab his hand and see whether or not he gets knocked the fuck out. Then he can put the money on the box.
Yeah. So, but they're digging up. They're doing some extra testing on Kennedy because they think it might have been a murder, and so everybody's getting very scared that all this is going to come out. We see Stilson warning the Reverend not to say anything, not to talk, because he'll be just as much brought down as Stilson will. But Stilson doesn't even know that anything's been done. He doesn't think that he had anything to do with Rachel's murder because he actually didn't know what was going on. So we see him getting a CAT scan, and they figure out that there's region of the brain that has this piece in it that they can actually fix and maybe fix his problem. So he's set to have an operation to end his little condition. If they're successful, then he won't have any more visions. He puts the decision in the hands of his ex-fiancée, and it says, "Listen, I want you to make the decision if I'm not conscious to have the operation and also to pull the plug if I'm not."
Right, because he doesn't want to be in a coma again. Right.
Right. So he says they give him a vision of just like a quick vision using a softball of the doctor's son catching a home run. That's fine. But then they give him a stronger vision. They give him his cane to hold on to, and he gets a vision of Christopher Way. He just kind of starts going into convulsions. And then we see a scene of Purdy shredding the Bible. He's showing where his moral sense is gone. He touches her camera, and he sees a vision of what she walked into, and she walked into them rigging voting machines. And so that was the thing that she saw that had to get her killed. And then we see Purdy giving a TV address where he resigns his commission, and he says that he lied and that he forged the suicide letter that framed Kennedy for the murder. And so now the murder investigation's reopened. And guess who's the chief suspect in that murder? Johnny. So this actually, when he gets confronted by Johnny, Johnny's like, "Why'd you lie?" And that almost pricks his consciousness and then gets Johnny back in trouble because he did it to protect Johnny. So Johnny kind of fucks himself with that. But he ends up getting thrown in jail for this. Now, we see that Stilson is trying to make some kind of political statement with the death of Rachel by passing what's called Rachel's Law, and it's some new crime bill.
It could sanction the death penalty if you kill a campaign worker.
Right. He's trying to get Johnny basically put to death because Johnny.
Yeah, that's what it is. That's what basically it is. If Johnny's proven to be her killer, then he gets the death penalty.
Yeah, he needs to get another vision from Stilson. He needs to shake his hand again to see what's going on. He goes to the office with Rebecca, who Stilson wants to help push this law because it's the sister of the woman who's murdered, Rebecca, who's kind of now become involved with, after thinking that Johnny killed his sister, she realizes he didn't.
They fall in love, yeah.
Yeah. And he's really into her. He's never felt this way about any girl except for his fiance, and you could tell even his fiance is a little jealous. But they're hot and heavy. They're in bed. She's having all these nightmares about her sister, and she just is determined. She wants Stilson to fry for this. So he becomes very dedicated to doing that. And so they figure out a way. Okay, she's gonna come and meet him to help sponsor his law, and she'll bring Johnny with him, and Johnny will somehow touch him, and that will help them gather more evidence against him. But what happens is that he even offers his hand to Johnny in the meeting, and he's like, "Hey, you want another vision? Here, shake my hand." And he just gets the vision of Apocalypse as another blackout.
And then collapses, right? He collapses,
yeah,
right?
Like she starts plotting at that point. She doesn't even care about the end of the world. She's just like, but that means he's going to get away with killing my sister. It's like, dude, I just told you the apocalypse is happening. She just kind of blows past that. So then he touches his cane. He ends up in the post-apocalyptic world. He sees himself after the apocalypse. He sees a version of himself, like burned face
and his son,
and all grown up. And he looks like he's blind from the explosion or something. He's all scarred, and he's like, and this is a crazy scene because when you see him come out and with the burnt face and everything, I think that's like one of the pinnacles of the show. Yeah, so he's like, when the time comes, do not save Rebecca, and that's like the end of the season. That's the cliffhanger right there. Then we go to the opening of the fourth season, and we see a flashback of Stilson as a kid selling Bibles with his dad, and his dad is having trouble, and he steps in and gets the Bible sold with some smooth talking. And so we know this guy is a politician from day one.
This is the beginning of the backstory for Greg Stilson. Up until this point, we just think he's morally corrupt. We don't know why he's morally corrupt. And this episode, part 2, shows why he's the way he is.
Right, and we see that he's domineered by his father. His father just beats him and abuses him, but he also has high hopes for him and wants him to get to high places, but he wants to be in complete control of him. And so they're constantly butting heads over this. He has this. Then we get to him, and it looked like he had the operation because once he got that vision of himself and way and the future and everything like that, he goes into a mini coma, and they can't revive him. So his ex-fiancée makes the decision for him to have the operation. So he wakes up and he's touching things, and he has no more visions. And then he asked about Rebecca, and they're like, "Oh no, she's dead because she killed Stilson." And then we realize, oh shit, that was just a dream. The dream that he has about that different future where the operation is a success, and she ends up assassinating Stilson. That's a vision that he understands now. She's going to be doing that. Like, she's basically planning on killing Stilson. So he needs to get the fuck out of this hospital and try to stop her. And we see the feds already show up, and they're here to take Johnny into custody because Stilson's father has pulled some strings in the FBI and gotten them to reopen the investigation on the murder. They start pinning it again on Johnny, and they get the feds chasing him down, and they're here to take him into custody, but he's already gone. Bruce has basically broken him out of the hospital. And we see here that Bruce is driving with Johnny and saying, hey, like, why don't you just let her just do her thing, man? Like, let her, she's willing to sacrifice it. Like, why rock the boat? Like, it has nothing to do with you now. And he's like, no, fuck that. I'm stopping her from doing it. And he doesn't give a shit. Like, even though his future self has told him point blank, don't try to save Rebecca, that's exactly what he's going to do. He doesn't give a shit. Mm-hmm. Rebecca goes to Stilson's office. She's all in support of this Rachel's Law. At first she was opposed to it because she thought it was just like him being an opportunist. But now she's pretending to be friends with him to get close to him. Obviously, we know she's just trying to get close to him so she can murder him. Yep. But she pretends like she lost her faith in Johnny, and she's now pretending that she wants Johnny to fry for the murder of her sister. We see Purdy he's in jail, and Walt goes to visit him, and Walt has received information from Johnny about Ellerman killing Mike Kennedy, this corrupt priest, and making it look like a suicide. And he wants Purdy to, like, for information, and Purdy's not really talking. Meanwhile, Johnny Smith goes to Washington. Mr. Smith goes to Washington, and he starts to try to investigate. I think he wants to go over to Rebecca's house. He's trying to track down Rebecca to stop her from killing Stilson, and he sees in his vision that she's planning on killing him when he does a press conference announcing the passage of Rachel's Law. So he goes to Rebecca's apartment, and he touches a few things, and he sees that Stilson's father and Ellerman have put bugs in the apartment. And then he sees another vision of Rebecca getting a gun from her drawer and putting it in her jacket. So then we see that Smith has been seen at the girlfriend's place. They send agents over. Bruce makes a big distraction, and that allows Smith to slip away. And then we see another flashback of Stilson. He looks like he was in love with some chick who his father didn't approve of, so he sent her packing with some cash.
He had gotten the girl pregnant, and so his father gave the woman money for an abortion and to leave town.
Right, and he was like in love with her, and he wanted to marry her.
Mm-hmm.
And the father's like, "Listen, I got plans for you," and he starts like grabbing her by the collar and just being like, "You just got to do what I say." And so that you see, like, this is also in the movie, is that the father is very influential in trying to get his fucked up son to be a better politician. From the first days of them selling Bibles together, his son is actually a better politician than his dad ever was. The Fed spots Smith, and he ends up stealing a cab and racing away. And Johnny calls Rebecca, trying to dissuade her from killing Stilson, and she's like non-committal at the point. And then we see this guy shows up at the jail where Purdy is. This guy named Malcolm Jenks, and he has this Illuminati ring, this triangle with an eye in it. And he's like, I represent a group of concerned citizens, and it's like
the most powerful people in the world he represents.
Yeah, they're impressed with what he's done in this little regional area of the church. He's consolidated a lot under him, and even though he resigned in disgrace, they believe that with a little rehabilitation, he can be forgiven and brought back and lead a much larger congregation, a national congregation that's basically the Illuminati version of the church. They say, like, we're going to give you a new opportunity here, man, and we can get you out of here, this jail. They can just pull strings because they got all the levers of power. They bust him out, and he's instantly back on the mend as the new leader of this Illuminati church. So Walt goes to Rebecca's house looking for Johnny, and ends up and finds Ellerman in there. And they're both in there. They're both like actually not supposed to be there, really. And he's like, "What are you doing here?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm just protecting the congressman from Johnny, who's stalking him." And they get into a kind of fist fight. At first, actually, Ellerman punches Walt. Then Walt punches him back. He gets his blood on him. So he takes the blood on his fist to Johnny, and Johnny touches the blood on his fist, and he sees them burying Rachel. So this is where Johnny realizes that Stilson is not the killer, that actually they did this behind Stilson's back. And he runs in and stops her from killing. She's right about to kill Stilson when they're making out in the hotel room. Johnny busts in, tells Stilson, he's like, "Your father killed Rachel, and you didn't even know about it." He takes Rebecca away, and then Stilson's sitting in his office, and his father comes, and he confronts his father. He's like, "You fucking killed Rachel? Like, you didn't tell me about it?" He's like, "Look, I did it to protect you," and he ends up strangling his father out of anger. And that's where this Jenkins guy comes in again, same guy from the Illuminati, takes Stilson under his wing and says, "Okay, we're going to take you to high places, and we're going to protect you by declaring this to be some accident that occurred because he was drinking." And then he fell down.
Which is a perfect setup, because Stilson's main political advisor was his father. He kills his father, and here comes this Malcolm guy who now takes his father's place as his political advisor, and is an even more evil version of his father.
Right, he even slaps him around like his father did.
Like his father, right? He takes his father's place in all aspects of his life, and that's where the series continues as he becomes the main heavy, pushing Stilson to become president of the United States.
Right, and then it makes it all the more sure. I love it when they bring in the Illuminati in these shows. They did it in the X-Files, and so they're doing it here, and it's too bad they weren't able to really get down to it.
There's a lot of movies out there that people are remaking, making it to a series. And I think it'll be more financially rewarding, because I'm going to tell you right now, the remake of New Jack City is going to bomb. It's going to bomb. Making it to a TV series, you can show the rise of Nino Brown, the rise of the Cash Money Brothers. You can show the life of the cop played by Ice-T in the movie, and how he got to be where he's at. And it could be a great 4 or 5 season run where it culminates in the arrest of Nino Brown, or the murder of Nino Brown. Here in the Dead Zone, had they not been canceled, The final episode would have been Johnny stopping the apocalypse.
But I think, like, ultimately, like, it probably would end just like the movie did, which is that he tries to kill him, but it ends up, the guy starts fucking himself by putting the kid in front. Remember, he held the kid up to try to get shot.
He put the baby in front of him. Right.
Yeah,
right.
Don't shoot me, shoot the baby. And so that kills his career and ends up keeping the end of the world from happening. So here we are. Stilson is president today, so I don't know, Johnny. I don't think you did a good job. But
Johnny didn't get the job done because, Greg Donald Trump Stilson is the president of the United States.
I know. And what's funny is that Stephen King is Johnny because it's his character. You know what I mean? Like, he's just like,
he created
the
character.
Guy.
He knows.
Yeah. He's like Johnny in real life. I mean, it's funny. They don't never really mention like the term Republican or Democrat. So I'm sure that in Republican districts who watch the show, they figure that Stilson is a Democrat, but like
that's Bill Clinton.
Right. So like they're very careful because they know that the show's got to be playing every kind of atmosphere, so they don't mention party at all. That's just like
which is smart, which is very smart.
Yeah. Because you don't want it to make it like a partisan show. It's just like a crooked politician could be in any party.
No, we're going after crooked politician. You decide what political affiliation he has.
So anyway, this is a great episode and perfect for Halloween. I think they're ripe for a remake of the movie or the series. And I could see bringing back Anthony Michael Hall. I mean, he hasn't aged that much comparatively. They could...
Anthony Michael Hall is the same age as I am. We were both born in 1968, like a month apart. He was born in April. I was born in May. Anthony Michael Hall, if you see him today, looks like Anthony Michael Hall in this episode of The Dead Zone.
Yeah.
So he could definitely replay that character.
What's our next movie?
Next week, Spawn, starring Michael Jai White, Teresa Randall, and John Leguizamo, on one of the most underrated comic book movies of all time. This was tremendous.
Yeah, Spawn is not Marvel or DC, right? It's like its own.
No, it's neither.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, man. So we'll be looking at that. Hopefully everyone will have a happy Halloween. We'll be back with another Halloween movie. One Silver Man, have a good one.
Talk to you next week, big man. Later.
Peace.